Commissioner Sisolak, welcome to KTNV. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, John. It's a real pleasure.
You know, people are very, very interested in this stadium. You're on the committee, in case people don't know. Like you, I'm a huge pro sports fan. I would love to see pro sports come here. You've asked some of the toughest questions, though. I'll give you that during these hearings. You know there's a but coming here.
I do. There's always a but, John.
Sheldon Adelson and Ed Roski, who are behind this, are worth a combined more than $30 billion. You have to answer this question that I have not seen answered yet, which is why should one dime of public money go toward a stadium that is being proposed by a couple of guys who are worth tens of billions of dollars?
Well, there's a couple issues you've brought up at that same time. What you're dealing with is public money, how you're classifying public money. There's a difference between sales tax, property tax, and room tax. You know, what the source of those funds are, what it can be used for. Mr. Adelson and Mr. Roski do not own the Raiders. This is simply for the stadium. You have to have a stadium in order to get Mr. Davis to bring his team here. So the community could use a stadium for the football team, for UNLV, for other potential events that could come as a result of that.
That's your answer, that the community could use it for events that we don't know about? We don't know if UNLV will be able to use this stadium. Again, the simple question is, you're right, it's not sales tax, it's not property tax, it's room taxes.
Right.
But those room taxes, if you're going to take them, could be used for other needs. Or are you saying that a stadium is the biggest need that this community has?
Well, the room tax is used for other needs. It's used for Cashman Field. It's used for the media and art projects that you see, the alligator and the lion in the middle of Decatur, and the plexiglass panels off on Rainbow. We use room tax dollars for that. Is that an appropriate use of room tax dollars?
Well, that's not for me to answer. You're the elected official. I guess what I'm not saying it's not an appropriate use. I'm suggesting that if you have two guys who are worth $30 billion wanting to build a stadium, whether it's for the Raiders or anything else, they could find the amount of money to build this stadium, whether it's $1.4 billion or $2.1 billion, whatever the final number is, they could find that in their couch cushions, and you want to divert room tax money that could be used to build schools, for infrastructure, for social services, to build a stadium for billionaires.
I think we need to do more for schools and for social infrastructure and whatnot. At the same time, the purpose of room tax, in my opinion, is to do whatever we can to promote Las Vegas, to promote the destination, and bring more tourists here. A stadium would promote the community and bring more people here. Now, how much of public money should go towards that, and how you would divide up any revenue that comes out of that's a whole other question. I don't think that the community should put in all the money and get nothing in return. But currently, we use room taxes for a plethora of issues. Whether that's appropriate or not is another issue. That's for the legislature to decide. That's not for me.
Oh, you're gonna punt to the legislature.
I'm not punting.
But I mean, you have to make a recommendation to the legislature.
Right.
Ultimately, this committee does. And as I said, you've asked a lot of tough questions about the financing plan. The original proposal was $750 million. There's now a proposal floating around for $500 million in room taxes. What does Steve Sisolak think is the appropriate percentage? Forget the number. How much of this should be public money?
Well, the $500 million proposal didn't go over very well. Both sides were like, wait, forget that. You know,
when you say both sides, what do you mean?
Mr. Roski, Mr. Adelson, and in fact, the board was like, where'd you come up with $500 million? That was just picked out of the air.
That was from the board. That was from some board members.
No, that was from Mr. Hill and Mr. Aguero came up with that figure. And
Steve Hill, the chairman, Jeremy Aguero, the financial
Correct. And that didn't really grab hold to anybody
Why not?
else. I don't know. They said, the two developers said that they wouldn't be able to do it if it was only $500 million. My question is, what's the public benefit going to be out of this, and what other public money comes in? Depending on the site you're talking about. If you put this, for example, at the Wild West site, the Fertitta site, let's just pick that
Tell
one.
people where that is.
That's on Tropicana in Dean Martin, where the Wild West Casino is. They've assembled around 100 acres there, 110 acres is my understanding. They'd vacate the streets and whatnot. You'd have to put in a tremendous amount of infrastructure. You'd have to put flyovers off of I-15 going into the stadium. You're going both north and south. You'd have to do a lot more with Tropicana in order to cover that tourist. You'd have to do something to Dean Martin. You were talking tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure that would have to go in for this. Who's going to pay for that? If the public is going to pay for that, if the developer is going to pay for that, you have to look at all the costs, what all the costs would be. UNLV will certainly play in the stadium, whether it's at UNLV grounds or if it's in another facility.
No question about that.
No question in my mind. I mean, they've made it clear they want to play in the stadium. It's obviously going to be a state-of-the-art stadium that's going to be
no matter where it is.
More bells and whistles than we have at Sam Boyd. You know, so
no matter where it is, because one of the complaints now is that Sam Boyd is so far from UNLV.
Right.
Shouldn't this be closer to UNLV?
Well, I think that wherever you put it, it's going to be closer to Sam Boyd, right? Unless you look at Cashman Field, which is almost as close as Sam Boyd.
We'll get to Cashman Field in a moment, but let's stick with this first. I guess you represent the constituents of the county. Your duty is to them. It's not to these developers. So the public money, theoretically, should be something that you're very, very concerned about. No, it's not taxpayer money. It's so-called tourist money. But that money, as I've already pointed out, could be diverted for other uses. Room tax has been used for a lot of different things. But there are a lot of public money components to this, potentially. There is something called a tax increment district that's being proposed that is very vague so far as I can tell. You tell me. But that essentially would allow the developers to get paid back by using tax money to pay themselves back.
Potentially a tax increment district, what you would do is you'd put a ring around wherever this facility was and any ancillary development that came as a result of the stadium. Potentially you could use some of that revenue, that tax revenue that's generated off of that, to service the debt or to repay the developers. That's absolutely true.
Is that a good idea?
I don't know. I'd have to see how much you're going to try to generate, see what the developers are going to put in. I mean, let me make it clear, Mr. Roski, Mr. Adelson, they're not making a philanthropic contribution to this community of $500 million. They're not doing it. Now, could they? Absolutely. MGM built T-Mobile and didn't ask for one penny of public dollars. I give them that. As a credit, Mr. Murren, I mean, he handled every problem that came along. I give him nothing but accolades for that.
You think he's upset that you're considering giving public money, Mr. Murren?
No, I think Jim Murren will do. I think that he'd prefer we not give a lot of public money, but I think that Jim Murren is a firm believer that we should do whatever we can to enhance the tourism in Clark County, and I think that this would help our tourism situation.
So I guess ultimately, how do you make the decision then on how much public money, and what is the sense that you're getting from your colleagues on that committee?
I mean, so first off, you got to see if you can even find a site to put the stadium on.
What's the best site? Let's talk about that.
You've got several sites that, in my opinion, won't work. You've got several sites that are being considered.
What won't work, Commissioner?
I don't think the Tropicana 42 site will work. I think it's just, first off, it's too small.
So talk about where that is, Tropicana.
That's Tropicana. It's across from McCarran International Airport on the north side of Tropicana between Paradise and Koval.
That application, I understand, is already with the FAA, which may have problems with it, correct?
Right. They did put it what's called a 7460, which would give them some height variables as it relates to that. UNLV also looked at another site, which is immediately south of the Mendenhall Center, where the parking garage currently is next to the dormitories. The parking garage would have to get torn down and rebuilt somewhere else. You've got some of the same issues there, and it's still a small piece of property. The sites that are the most attractive, in my opinion, the Rock and Rio site, the developers talked to MGM, and I guess they didn't come to a number. There's some challenges with that site in terms of size and the layout of the actual parcel. I mean, it's not a square. It's kind of like a hockey stick-shaped parcel. There's the Wynn Golf Course was talked about, but they didn't come up with an agreement on the number as it related to that. The two that are getting the most attention now are the one I mentioned earlier, the Wild West site, the Fertitta site, and Valley High Golf Course on the south end of the Strip.
So Valley High Golf Course, that's an interesting one. Billy Walters, who owns that, has been trying to get rid of that.
No, he doesn't own it. The county owns that through the BLM. He's got a lease.
He leases it, excuse me, you're right. But there's been some controversy over that land for a long time, as you well know better than anybody else. And Billy Walters wants to essentially get out of that lease, am I right?
No, Billy Walters would like to change that lease to put some other development on that project.
That's what I mean.
Right, yes, he would certainly like to do that, yes.
So here's the issue you have as a county commissioner. You and I have talked about this many times. We're going to get this. I mean, Billy Walters is a huge campaign contributor. He's a huge campaign contributor, not just to you, but to a lot of folks. And so people are going to wonder, maybe these guys on the county commission are going to do favors for developers instead of doing the right thing for us. How do you answer that?
I don't believe in doing favors for donors. I've got
Doesn't it look like that,
donors.
Though?
Well, people can make it look any way they want to make it look. You know, I've got 1,000 people that donate to my campaign. Because
only 1,000?
I've only got 1,000 this cycle because I try to be as accessible as I can to those folks, and I try to do what's right, and hopefully that they like what I do and appreciate my service and understand that politics is expensive and contribute to my campaign.
Have you practiced that answer in front of a mirror?
Only when I'm with you, John.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm asking about, it's not just Billy Walters. Sheldon Adelson suddenly decided that Steve Sisolak is a great guy and gave at least $30,000 to you. Ended last year, beginning of this year, maybe more. I'm hoping I didn't short you there. You appeared in this video with a bunch of other elected officials, making the stadium sound like the second coming. I mean, did that feel uncomfortable at all doing that?
Not at all. John, my feeling is very strong. I am an enormous sports fan, as are you. And I follow you on Twitter, and I know how you follow the Buffalo Bills, and I know how proud you are. To have
You had to bring
one-
up the Bills to try to change my
I had to
tone,
bring
didn't
up.
you?
I did. I had to
Okay,
bring up
go-
the Bills, and
go.
nobody would like to see the Bills play the Raiders in the stadium more than you would.
That's true.
I have to say that there are 32 teams in the NFL. 24, 26 of those will probably never move, let's be honest. If you're talking about the Patriots and the Giants and the Packers and the Eagles and the Bears, those are never going to move out of where they're at. So you've got 6, 8 teams that potentially could ever move. To have an opportunity to be one of 32 cities that are home to an NFL franchise is something that's very, very important. There's a cost associated with that. I give you that. How much of that should be for the public to support and how much should be all private is a real question.
Well, one thing I know about you is you read a lot of stuff, and you've read about stadiums in other cities. I know you have, and taxpayers getting left holding the bag, and schemes that have been put forth by developers that never bring any real economic benefit to the community. You've seen some of these economic studies. I know you have. That has to concern you a little bit.
It concerns me greatly. It concerns me greatly. I asked Mr. Davis myself what his commitment was. He said it's a lifetime commitment to stay in Las Vegas, that he would guarantee that they wouldn't move.
Why would you believe them? They've moved before.
Well, they moved before because my understanding is the city didn't support them. I believe firmly that if this city sold out T-Mobile for hockey, that they'd sell out this stadium for football.
It's a lot more seats.
It's a lot more seats, but it's a lot less games, and it's not much difference in terms of the price when you factor in how many games it is. There are more football fans than there are hockey fans. I think it would be immensely successful to have it here. It's difficult to come up with a number. It's important to keep in mind that the two developers, Mr. Adelson and Mr. Roski, do not own the team that's going to play in there. They're going to be a tenant of the landlord. He would be one of the landlords. He'd make a contribution. Just like the public would make a contribution, there'd be some way to divide up the equity that came in as a result of that. The big winners, and you're absolutely right on this one, is going to be the Raiders. I mean, Mr. Davis, the value of that franchise is going to go up considerably. They get the TV rights, they get the parking, they get the luxury suites, they get the concessions, they get all of that stuff. So that's where the money is going. I don't believe that the developers are going to get a huge windfall here. They're going to get paid back. I'm sure they hope that they will, but that remains to be seen.
If there's public money, why shouldn't the public have a profit-sharing agreement with the stadium?
Public should have some type of profit sharing, and this depending on what the revenue coming in would be, and we've talked through that.
And are the developers receptive to that at all? Are the Raiders receptive to that?
It's not a matter of the Raiders being receptive to it, because the Raiders deal with it simply as a tenant. They will
Right.
lease the stadium for X number of games. The developers, I think the developers realize that there is enough interest that the public gets something back, depending on how many events you'd get in the stadium is a real question, John. You're going to get, there's 10 NFL games, 8 games and 2 preseason games. You can get UNLV in there for, 8 games maybe, and you're going to get a bowl game and maybe another bowl game. I don't know if you're going to get soccer here for a whole month. I know Mr. Goldstein said we could probably get soccer
From the Sands,
From
Mr.
the
Goldstein
Sands.
from the Sands.
I don't know if you could do that. I mean, he knows that better than I do. Are there some, my understanding is there are some concerts, some entertainers that will not play in an arena. It's simply not big enough for them. I don't know how that many that's going to be, but you're going to bring hundreds of thousands of people potentially to Las Vegas to stay in our rooms, eat in our restaurants, shop in our stores, and create jobs in our community. That's a positive thing. If you get enough events there, and the stadium, by charging rent for those events, spins off enough money to provide an adequate return to these investors, which we're looking at about 9%, then the public should share in what comes back over that. Absolutely.
You mentioned it earlier, this proposal by the city council, Las Vegas City Council, and the mayor to put it in Cashman Field. I get the sense that nobody on the committee really outside of the mayor supports that. Is that an accurate representation?
I think people are being respectful of the mayor. I mean, she's doing her job. She's advocating to try to put something on. Then they talked about putting it at Symphony Park. So I think she's doing what she can to try to.
But you don't think that has much chance?
I don't believe that has much chance.
Let me be devil's advocate with you for a second. As a public official, and we talked about, listen, these people have immense political influence. We've talked about that. If you're trying to do something good for the public, that's a blighted area, essentially, downtown, Cashman Field.
It
you
is.
put a stadium down there, and you get all the stuff that you're just talking about around it. Maybe you're going to really revitalize downtown. It's happened in other places. Have you been to Petco Park in San Diego?
Absolutely.
And Coors Field, other places like that have revitalized downtown areas. Why isn't that a good place to put a stadium to revitalize downtown?
And Petco is one of my favorite baseball stadiums.
Yeah, me too.
And I know Jake caught a foul ball there, and I'm jealous of that
My
because I
son
have
did
not,
catch a
I've not
foul-
caught a foul ball
Yes,
yet at any
exactly.
Major League game, and I'm a little jealous of that. But Petco Park is a beautiful facility, but it's near the hotels down in the Embarcadero area. They're the ones that are charging the room tax. If you ask these strip properties to charge a room tax, which is how we would service his debt, in order to pay for the stadium, and then you're going to send them 8 miles away to go to a stadium somewhere else, they're not as thrilled with that as they are if they put it in
If
a
they
place
care
that
about the
could walk
community
to.
they're not paying the room tax. They're not paying the room tax. The people
Their
who come
guests
into
are paying the room tax,
right.
right? But there's some elasticity in terms of how much you go up on this room tax and then how it starts affecting your customers. I think it's a little far away. I don't think it would matter at all for a football game. I think it would. UNLV is another story because that's almost as far from the campus as Sam Boyd is. For a Raiders game, I don't think it would matter. I think people would go to Boulder City if that's where you put the stadium. They'd drive halfway to Pahrump
Right.
if that's where you put. For the other events that we're talking about, I think that it would have some impact, and that's the reason I think that the resorts aren't so thrilled with it.
What is the bottom line here? I mean, I'm wondering what the lobbying has been like. I mean, is Sheldon Adelson calling you a lot? Is Mark Davis calling you a lot? Ed Roski, Billy Walters? Are these people really engaged in this and really lobbying the committee and you a lot?
All of those people have called and engaged me with the exception of Mr. Walters. We're not involved with him. I mean, that's an issue that the developers would, he has a lease with the county for another 84 years. That
Right.
predated me,
Right.
that this lease came, which wasn't a...
You haven't been on the county commission for 84 years?
Not that long, no,
Right.
only 8 years. But that lease predated me. It was not a good lease for any, it's not made any money for the BLM or for the county. The developers would have to buy out his lease and then change the use on that property. First off, they have a private transaction that developers have to do with Billy Walters. Unless they do that, there's no point in going any further.
Why do you like that site? Why is that affected by the airport at all?
Yeah, there's some potential effect by the
It's
airport.
not that far from the airport.
It's not, but the runway alignment is a little different on that site. You see Mandalay Bay's got 500 feet immediately to the north of that. If you put on the northern part of that property, we're hopeful that it would probably fit. What I like about the site is it's immediately adjacent to I-15. 215 is a mile down the road.
So for ingress and egress,
Ingress would be fabulous. You've got the monorail is being extended all the way to Mandalay Bay as a part of what this SNTIC committee came up with. And you've got hotel rooms within walking distance. So I think that one would fit very, very well. Whether or not they can work a private deal remains to be seen. The Fertitta site is a great location. I mean, we could build the
Are
infrastructure.
they interested?
I don't know. I have not spoken to them about that.
They have not called you?
not.
No one from their organization has called you?
No one from their organization.
So everyone just figures that maybe they'd be interested? They got $4 billion to throw around now after selling UFC or what?
Everybody's spending their $4 billion.
Yeah, right.
I think that they have. I've been led to believe they have been having discussions with the developers, with Mr. Adelson and Mr. Roski or their representatives. But they have not really made a comment to the committee as such.
So let's wrap this up and let's talk turkey here. What's the most optimistic timeline that you see the committee being able to make a recommendation, the legislature acting, and then of course the final step would be the NFL would have to vote to approve this, and
Right.
you need more than 20 owners, right,
Yeah,
to
24.
to approve this. Tell me your most optimistic timeline here.
Well, you know politics better than I do, John. My understanding in talking to the Raiders that I believe the cutoff, the window is like January 2nd until February 15th. They have to go to the NFL during that window. If they don't go during that window, they have to wait till next year. They have
Right.
to wait till 2018.
Exactly.
It takes them a couple months to come up with, they want to see not just, okay, we're thinking about this site or thinking about that site, and this might be what we do and this might be how we finance it. They want details. They want drawings. They want, it's going to take a couple months to put that package together is what we've been, what's been represented to us. If this committee came forward with a proposal, it has to go, a recommendation, it has to go to the legislature. Now, there's a blackout window for fundraising, which all these folks are, a lot of them are up for re-election.
They can't raise, in case people don't know about this, because you and I are
Yeah.
insane people who follow politics this closely. Yeah. Most people are not. There are blackout periods before and after and during any legislative session, so that would prevent them from raising money for a certain period of time.
And we have talked about this. I've talked about this with Steve Hill, and I've talked about this with the developers. Right now, I believe there's 4 vacancies in the legislature. You've got to get 2/3 in order to approve a tax increase. So they'd have to be able, that's not out of my wheelhouse. That's their job to do the lobbying and get it passed. You'd have to get a lot of people in the legislature to support this. The legislature is going to change the day after the election. You can get some new people there. They might think they understand how these legislators feel, but they don't know how the new people are going to feel. So that's going to put a whole new...
So they want to get it before the election, the developers generally? You get that sense?
I get the sense that they'd like to do it before the election, but they
But then the blackout period becomes an
right,
issue.
so you'd have to do it somewhat before that blackout period, and then you have to question whether or not the legislators want to face this issue, a couple weeks before they're up for election.
Well, according to you, there's no controversy. It's great for the community, divert room tax
no,
money.
no.
Come on, no big deal,
I didn't say
right?
there's no controversy. There's definitely controversy, but I think it is good for the community if you can make the numbers work. That's been my question all along, if you can make the numbers work, and that's been a moving target, which is difficult. I mean, originally, we didn't have a site at all. They were talking about, let's allocate $50 million, $100 million for land. That was nowhere near enough. I brought up infrastructure. Who's going to pay for the infrastructure on these sites? And the developers said we did until they found out how much infrastructure was going to cost. Then that suddenly changed. So you've got to drill down to it. I firmly believe that if we could come up with a financing plan, that the public would make a contribution, whatever that would be, and there's a potential for us to get some return on that contribution. And
Us meaning the public.
Us meaning the public. And the stadium authority, which would be
Right.
Developed. And we're convinced it would bring more tourists here. That'd be a great thing. Everybody isn't going to step up like MGM did. I mean, that T-Mobile is an incredible facility. They pack that place. They've got events night after night after night. It brings a lot of people to our community. I think a stadium would do the same thing. I don't think it would bring as many as T-Mobile because you can't get that many events.
Right, and because it's much bigger venue to fill that many seats. I mean, and what you're saying makes sense, but the timeline here still, they could do a special session after the election. There's kind of a dead period then, but you're saying that developers are worried about the uncertainty of who would actually be in the legislature. Exactly. Then that's what's going on, right?
Exactly. There wasn't a lot of appetite to make it part of the regular session because then there's so many issues involved.
But the regular session probably misses the NFL deadline.
It would miss the NFL deadline. It absolutely would miss the NFL deadline. I think there's some certainty with some of the legislators that are there now. Who would be there in November after the election? It would be another story.
So they're pretty confident they could get to 2/3 with who's there now.
That's their job. I don't know. That doesn't seem to be
Didn't half of them appear in that video with you promoting the thing?
I don't know if those people are up for office or some of them appeared in the video. And
the two Senate leaders were in.
They were. I saw them both there.
So. Bottom line, do you think, and you've been around politics for a while now, you understand politics, is this going to happen?
John, that number changes, that percentage changes in my head every day depending how the interaction with the developers go. I think that the only way it's going to happen is if it happens quickly. The more time is working really against us here, not just with the legislature and the NFL, but so many variables coming into it. I think it's got a decent chance of happening, but I wouldn't bet on it.
What would you vote for this if half of it was funded by public money?
Half of it?
Yeah.
No.
A third? Does that sound right?
Close.
Okay. Finally, you know what I'm going to ask you about. My final question I always ask you about. Are you running for governor?
I'm running for re-election in November. That's
not okay. But you are. Is it fair to say you're seriously thinking about running for governor after you win re-election, which is not an issue? You're going to win re-election, and you raised like $17 million to run for re-election.
I wish I raised $17 million.
I bet you do wish that.
I didn't.
$3 million.
I'm working to run for re-election right now. I'm definitely looking at the possibility of running for governor if I'm re-elected in November.
Why do you want to be governor?
Because I think there's a lot of things in the state that we could improve. I do. I think there's a lot we could improve. What you've brought up just here with, give billionaires money to build a stadium. Is it okay to give billionaires money to build a car battery factory or to build Faraday in North Las Vegas? I mean, how is this any different? They're billionaires too.
Those weren't good deals, Tesla and
I
Faraday?
don't know if they were good deals. I don't know if they're good deals. I don't know what jobs were created by that. I know the jobs that are created out of a stadium, and that's something that has to be analyzed. Something has to be done.
You think there are better jobs created out of a stadium than what Tesla and Faraday are doing?
I don't know if they're better jobs. The construction jobs are
Right.
definitely going to be more. Absolutely. The permanent jobs, I don't think they'd be more.
Right.
I think it's going to, obviously, when you start talking the salaries that are coming in here, that's going to be significant into this community. Something needs to be done with our tax structure. Our property tax, it's how local governments fund themselves. The state uses that. This 3%, 8% cap is not working because of the roll forward.
Property taxes were capped. That happened when values went out of sight. It's not true anymore.
95% of the properties are in the cap mode right now. That has to change. We shouldn't be funding. You brought up education and room tax. Room tax should not be funded. Our education should not be funded out of room tax. I mean, it should be funded out of property tax.
There was some diverted from room tax at one time.
Absolutely.
Remember that? Yeah.
Absolutely, I do. That should be funded out of property tax. We need to redo the entire system. I mean, I don't think it's popular, but I think that the state has come to the point where we need a better tax model than we currently have.
August 5th, 2016, Steve Sisolak came on KTNV and announced his candidacy for governor. That sure sounded like an announcement, right?
That was not an announcement.
I'm
running for re-election this November, John, and that's what I'm focused on.
Steve Sisolak, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, John. My pleasure. Thanks.
All right.
Best of luck to you, my friend.
All right. We good?
We're good. So now.